Welcome to Boswell Book Company's virtual event series. I'm Daniel Golden, the proprietor. It is day 4,354 of us being in business. And tonight we are honored to bring you an evening with Dantiel W Moniz, I should say, who has won many prizes for her stories that are collected in Milk, Blood, Heat. And I just want to mention, today we got the spectacular Floridian. Can you see? I don't know if you can see the, can you see? Yes, there you go. The beautiful orange. You know what state that's coming from. So we do have those. If you already bought your book from us, as a number of you did, you can just contact me or the store and we'll get you a book plate also. The titular, Milk, Blood, Heat was awarded the 2018 Alice Hoffman Prize for Fiction, and Outside the Raft won the Cecilia Joyce Johnson Emerging Writer Award at the Key West Literary Seminar. He is currently the Mendota Lecturer at UW-Madison, which means that were it not for COVID, she might have come anyway, which is super cool. I would just like to give a quote that, from Danielle Evans. Dantiel Moniz is a brilliant new talent. Her writing lush and sharp, her landscape so rich it feels like we could step into it. Her characters so alive and full of longing that they might step out of the page and take the reader with them wherever they're headed next. This is a particularly exciting evening because Megan Giddings, the author of Lakewood, another one of my favorite books of last year, is doing the conversation. And I want to say congratulations to her because the book was just named a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. I also want to give her a special thumbs up for actually introducing me to this author. So let me just say, the next time that Giddings gives you a recommendation, you should take it. So with that said, I'm going to hand things over. I believe Ms. Moniz is going to do a short reading, and I got your first name pronounced, and now I think I'm screwing up your last name, and I'm so sorry about that. So thank you both for coming.
Thank you so much for hosting us. Excited to be here. Yeah, so I'm going to get started. I'm just going to read a really short excerpt from the story Feast. I'm trying to read a different story every time I do one of these events so I don't get sick of myself. So yeah, I'm just going to read a little bit. There is only moonlight, a spill of it across Heath's shoulders, illuminating how he lies on his side, turned from me, and also the pair of minuscule hands floating above the curtain rod, the fingers small as the tines of a doll's silver fork. When I call my husband's name, my voice splinters from my throat and Heath wakes immediately, turns on the bedside lamp, leans in so close I can smell the sleep on his breath. He checks my pupils, then lays the cool back of his hand against my forehead. Do you have any pain? He asks, and I want to swallow my mouth, to fold in my lips and chew until they burst to keep myself from laughing. I place my hands on my stomach and nod. Heath reaches underneath my sleep shirt to test the tenderness of my skin. What hurts? His fingers keep pressing, like I'm clay. Everything, I say. He looks at me then, and in the look I can see him envisioning how I will be at some point in the future, 10 years from now or 20. I am a vague imprint of the girl he thought I was when we married, my mouth a black cave, ugly and squared. Raina, you're fine, Heath says. Everything's okay. It was a nightmare. He turns the light back out, and I don't correct him, don't mention the tiny hands that are still climbing up and down the drapes. We are both pretending. It's the only way we sleep. This thing with the body parts makes sense to me, this fixation with scale. I blame all those baby tracker apps for that, measuring the growth of my child as compared to produce, kumquats and Brussels sprouts, pomegranate seeds, green lentils, except instead of roots, it was growing a brain and tongue, eyebrows, a thumb to suck. Briefly, I'd been in love with it. Heath and I had been married for 3 years, and he had this whole other child, this ex-wife, a past life that had nothing to do with me. I had my friends' questions, when y'all having kids of your own? And my mother's proclamations, that baby's gonna have good hair. I had 2 hands held out, waiting to receive my due. I'd wanted a honeymoon baby, a curly-haired kid with golden skin and Heath's hazel eyes. While I waited, I would practice with his child. Out together at dinner, I'd wind a strand of Neela's hair behind her ear, tell her not to eat so fast, introduce her as our daughter. 9 months ago, when I missed my period, when I confirmed with the pee stick and the doctor, when I told Heath over a bottle of expensive champagne and a card that read Daddy, I was glowing from the inside out. This baby validated me in the same way as my master's degree, my good credit, Heath's getting down on one knee. I bought the baby books, browsed the best cribs, shunned the million things expectant mothers should shun. Rule by rule, I was everything I was supposed to be, twice as good for half as much. The baby was the size of a Washington cherry, with miniature sex organs even a skilled technician couldn't see when I lost it. There had been no symptoms. It was too small for fluttering. And when I went to the appointment, the milestone when embryo became fetus, the doctor told me she was sorry, her face solemn and practiced. There was no heartbeat. It was, and then it wasn't. This is common in early pregnancy, she told me. It happens all the time. Once the fetus is out and you begin ovulating, you can try again. The fetus, she'd said, and the word I'd been so excited about minutes earlier soured. I opted out of the D&C and the pill, waiting for things to proceed naturally. There was still hope inside of me. Doctors were wrong all the time. I prodded my slim belly, shook it, willing my baby to move. Wake up, baby, I commanded. But the next day, the bleeding started and didn't stop. The doctor said, it's beginning, and there was nothing to do. Heath kissed my forehead, tried to fold me into his arms, but I couldn't let him hold me. I locked myself in the bathroom with the baby books, flipping through them carefully, and nowhere was it written how to reverse time or spark a heartbeat, how to make a womb worthy. I tore the pages out in handfuls and flushed them down the toilet, watched as they swirled back up in soggy clumps and came to rest at my feet. Later, in the shower, my baby would come out that way. I saw the first baby part in a bouquet of marigolds Heath brought home that night, the small slit of sex resting among the petals, a girl. I was afraid to blink in case it disappeared. She was with me, talking to me, which meant maybe I could talk back. I was glad to see her, even in this way. If a tiny ear appeared, I'd whisper into it how much she'd been wanted. But over time, these signs began to feel less like benedictions, more like blame. I didn't tell Heath. This was for me, and I didn't need a psychiatrist to understand what these visions were. A reminder of how the baby would have developed if she were still safe inside of me. Thanks.
Oh, that was beautiful, Dantiel, and I love that story. I could have listened to you read the whole thing.
I wanted to read that one with you just because I feel like it has some kind of correlations with Lakewood. You know what I mean? There's like an eeriness that's happening.
Yeah, and I know I said I was going to start with fun, but let me ask you a serious question first because you read from these. So a lot of the things that I admired about your stories is even though most of them are realism, you still have this ability to keep taking these little tiny steps toward things getting really weird. And I wanted to know, because so many of your stories, they're so psychological and character driven.
Yeah.
How do you think that these elements of surreality, the stranger elements that you bring into things, how do you think those help build your characters and our understanding of them?
Well, you know, I feel like reality is already so subjective, right? It's dependent on who the viewer is, who the person experiencing the reality is. So there's always, I feel like there's this line where you can almost always step around the corner and be somewhere really strange. Or, you know, there's moments that happen in your life where you're like, is that real? Like if I told anybody this, would they believe me? And I just feel like there are ways in which, you know, the surreal kind of gets at truth in a way that feels less like there's less barrier between the seeker and the truth. I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, it makes absolute sense. I mean, there's like this one time, not to get too personal with you right away, but where I had a friend who passed away really early, and I swore like I saw him one night just walking along the side of the road, and it wasn't him. I know that. Well, I don't know that ghosts aren't real, but I was still like psychologically, I was sure it was him just in that moment by himself. And I can't stop thinking about it, even though it's been like over a decade now. And I know that it's like that level of like, my brain was saying, I want to see him again. And that's why the moment sticks with me. But it's also like tied into what you're saying. We sometimes see the things we need to see to understand ourselves.
Yeah, I think the mind is such a powerful tool. I mean, it can be a destructive tool, right? It's all about that balance of kind of having the mind work for you versus it working you. But I do think that honestly, the universe is just so large. I feel like it would be arrogant of me to assume that I know everything about it and that we've discovered all there is about it. So I'm just like, yeah, sure. You know, I've had things happen to me in my life where I'm like, can't explain it. I know it happened because I was there and somebody else was there. And so I don't want to mess with it too much, but also like, cool, you know. Yeah.
How do you handle that though? Because you've gone through MFAs, and I think the MFA culture, when you're in the room together, and there's so much of an element when you bring like a group of people together, they want consensus.
Yeah.
And when you're starting out writing, I felt like, at least for me, there was a lot of pressure that writing had to follow the rules. And then, but how do you get that element of life? Because your stories do this. There's so many of them where it feels so alive, Dantiel. It's so great. But how do you do this in fiction? How do you move toward that space?
I'm going to say that's a really big compliment for me, because that, you know, having the stories be visceral, obviously they're working on intellectual levels, but for me, that physical level, which is, you know, it's a 2-dimensional page. So it's like, how do you transfer these emotions and these feelings to a reader? And so the real answer is, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm just a writer who, okay, so I would say that for myself, you know, like if you're talking to something, some people will say, oh, I think this, da, 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 da. I started noticing that most of the time what I say is I feel. I'm like, oh, I feel like. And so I think there's something there where I just have I'm very in tune to my emotions and people's emotions around us, because there's an intelligence in emotions that it's trying to tell you something. It's there for a purpose. And you don't, your emotions aren't happening in your brain. They're actually happening in your body, right? You can feel joy, you can feel anger, you can feel grief and that kind of thing. And so I guess I've been so observant over my own life about like, what are my reactions to certain things? And then I don't know. Honestly, so the real answer is I don't know. Sorry.
No, I love that. I feel like so much of writing is sometimes having the willingness to admit you don't know, but you're trying to find out.
Yeah. And there's a way in which, you know, we all are in our individual ways. We are that way. We operate in certain ways. And there's something about when you become a writer, not when you become a writer, but when you become an author, right? Where people want you to like, okay, well, break it down. And that's totally normal and natural. But I think that, you know, it goes into the face of that little bit of it where it's kind of like magic. It's kind of like, well, I don't know. And honestly, it works. So I don't want to look at it too closely, because what if I like destroy the magic of it?
Yeah. When my students ask me, I sometimes tell them like, you have to fuck around and find out.
Fuck around and find out. That's it's really for real. And you were saying something earlier about the MFA and consensus that I'm teaching right now in an MFA program. And one of the things that I think goes right along with talking about craft and stories and how a story is made is having a student trying to understand basically what is their own instinct and their own voice and impulse, and what is something that they think is, you know, like a fear or an anxiety that's really something external that they've internalized. So basically, I feel like, you know, writing is a solitary practice up until a point, right? There's so much, you know how it is when you're writing a book, so many hands go into that, so many eyes and hearts and all of that stuff. But I do think it's important to protect what is solitary and individual about a story, so that when it gets to the community, it can actually be beneficial. So it's like two things. It's both collective and solitary, and like, what's the balance of that?
I love that. The collective and the solitary. And then you spend your entire career in everything you write trying to understand how much of this has to be one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, we went really deep first, but all right. I thought I would ask you to tell me your associations with the following words.
Okay.
All right. Milk.
That's a cheat. I was going to say heat, but really like cow.
Okay. Cigarettes.
Ooh, dust.
Blood.
Crimson. I just saw color when that happened. It's just like my whole thing went, yeah.
Gold.
Leo.
Bones.
Oh my God. I was just gonna say bone again. Bone. I don't know.
Bone.
Bone. Earth. Let's say earth.
Earth. Okay.
Yeah.
Monsters.
I really am seeing like a cross between Bigfoot and like the Loch Ness monster in my head. I feel like I'm failing the test. Is this a test?
This isn't a test.
Okay.
It's just to get you to relax for a minute. And it's also like these are some of the motifs from your stories.
Yeah.
Where
I recognize them as motifs. I'm like, oh, I mean, but I'm not gonna be like, I don't know.
Yeah. Not on page 79. This meant this. Yeah. And one more. Trees.
Life.
So now that you've warmed up a little bit, it was not a test, I promise. I was just really curious because like when you build a collection or you're building a novel, you do have to have that balance. Like you're thinking about how each repetition builds on one another.
Yeah.
And I want to know now that you've done your free association for a minute, how hyper aware were you when you were bringing Milk, Blood, Heat together about like the motifs of blood and milk and even gold and bones? How much did you think about this in your story placement?
So yeah, I was writing, the oldest story in the book is from 2012. That's Outside the Raft. I wrote it in my undergraduate. Clearly not the way it exists in the book. No, not at all. It was like, yeah, I actually use that story a lot in class to teach my students, my undergrads, about revision, that it's not just you took out a word here or you moved a comma. I'm like, no, like look at structurally, this is what revision is. But
side note, Dantiel, that is frightening. Kaming Chang visited my undergrads last week, and she said that she wrote bestiary in 3 months. And well, she was like super young. And I thought that she was gonna like talk to them about the revision, but they were like, we can write a novel in 3 months. And I had to be like,
Yep. And so, yep, it's all about getting them to understand that no, the real story is a revision. The first few drafts is you telling the story to yourself, and revision is so that you can tell that story, as best you can to somebody else that's not you. Yeah. But no, so I had that story, and then I got into my MFA, and then I wrote maybe 4 or 5 more. And I thought I was just writing the same story. I was like, you are so stale. You keep writing the same story and it's just people with different names. And then I realized that maybe that's what collections do. They're like taking the same question or obsession and turning it at different angles and exploring it through different viewpoints. And so then I felt a little bit less like hard on myself about what I was writing. And then, oh, it's a collection. So then I went back and I read the earlier stories and I was like, okay, these are the words that keep repeating. And then I was more consciously kind of doing that, as it went along. But I'm glad that you brought about repetition, because repetition and circles and cycles is something I'm definitely doing. I think of these words as totems. That's what I've been calling them myself. And each time you see it appear in a story, and the next time, I'm hoping it picks up energy and resonance. So, by the time you get to that very last line of the last story, it's just like reverberates back. But yeah, so that was something intentional. Like once I realized I was doing it, but I think my brain kind of naturally moves in kind of a cyclical type of energy.
And you touched on what I was going to ask next, what are your obsessions?
Yeah, I think I always have been I wondered, I have all these old journals, like from when I'm like 6, 7, 8. And like, even back then I was like, why was I born like a human and not a tiger? Or like, that's so basically, I think my obsessions are, why are we here? Why are we the way that we are? And like, how come everything around us wants to tell us that's not okay unless we buy something? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of where I feel like I'm at with that. So I'm obsessed with not just goodness and badness, or, I'm obsessed with morality, but not just like the blatant, like, oh, this is good, this is bad, but like, those are subjective words. Who gets to define those words? How is that power wielded? How have we seen it wielded in our own lives or throughout history or whatever it is? So I'm obsessed with that. And then a secret thing that I didn't realize I was writing towards, like I knew, okay, it's like, okay, here's the question. which is, am I a good person? But really, like, am I a bad person? Like, that's the thing that I kept coming back to, because I tend to think negatively when I'm like, are you a bad person? Like, why can't you say it's a good person? But the other thing I was writing towards is, should I have children? I think that came up, you know, like, even in the stories that don't directly deal with mothers and daughters, I think that's still the question of like, well, what does it mean to be responsible for keeping someone whole? You know what I mean? Like, it's a bigger responsibility than our society usually paints it, which is like, oh, that's just the next step.
Yeah, I'm going to skip ahead. I have all these questions, but I'm going to go to a more serious one for a minute because it's a natural flow. So one of the other things that I really liked about this collection, because you were just talking about it, is that you show how that a plot can be just making these considerations. It's the deep thinking, the decision making, especially ones that made the huge impression on me were Snow and Necessary Bodies. But especially Necessary Bodies, because you were just talking in some way about making that choice to be a mother or to not be a mother. Can you just talk more about how do you give your characters the space on the page to make those considerations and let that drive for the plot? Because I think so much of the time when someone says plot, it's really easy to say it's big. It's a car crashing. It's
action things. Yeah. And so that's one of the other things. And I'm going to probably say it a million times, because obviously I'm in that classroom minded space, like, because I'm teaching currently. But, you know, you get a lot, it happens with literary stories a lot, right? Where people are like, well, nothing happens. And it's like, well, there's a difference between plot, as in like we're talking about it, the big thing, the things that are happening, and energy. And I think narrative energy is something that's also really important to have in a story. And so even though these characters might not be doing a lot as far as like, here's the plot and it's working up to this moment, that narrative energy is building and rising and falling and working up to something. So I think that, you know, for me too, I think I spend so much time in my head that it's really easy for me to understand a character's inner space as a type of setting and things happening and you know, motion and movement in that way too. So yeah, I think that that's it. So like for me, whether or not the character is moving through a large space, that energy underneath whatever's happening, the thoughts, whatever, is still moving.
I really like calling it narrative energy. Because I think it still gives like that motion for that a story needs.
Exactly. So there's like, if there's nothing happening like plot, but literally the energy feels like it's paused or stalled or whatever, I'll be like, hey, how can we get the energy moving? Not necessarily the plot, because I think when younger writers tend to start thinking about like in terms of plot, they're like, oh, we got to have them moving, and it becomes like these kind of stilted narratives that don't feel natural to whatever the character's doing. And I'm like, well, get rid of that for a second and just think about what's energy. Where's that character's focus at right now? And then how can you make the plot, whatever that is for you, feel like it's organic from the character?
Yeah. All right, a more relaxed question. So what outside of writing fuels your writing? What are the things that you do that helps you get to the spot where you're able to write?
Yeah, I watch a lot of TV. I always have. And like, I know, like, you know, especially back in the 90s, whatever, growing up, it was like TV rots your brain. But I was like, I'm an active watcher of television. Like, what I mean is like, my husband and I will be watching something and he gets like really annoyed because I'll be like, okay, do you see how that arc went? I was like, do you see what's going to happen? I'm telling you, in 2 scenes, this thing is going to happen. And he's like, can we just watch the thing? I was like, well, this is how I watch. I'm always kind of distilling narrative from things. I feel like I'm a very image-based thinker. And so all the time what I do is I'm either translating images into words or vice versa. But so like, you know, watching films and TV shows fills me. People watching fills me. People are so interesting. Actually, I think people are the reason why I write. I'm just so interested in why people are. So I'll just be like on my balcony that like faces the street. And I'm just like nosy neighbor. You know what I mean? Like not in a bad way, but I'll just be like, oh, what's going over here? It's interesting. And then I've been roller skating. I've been trying to learn how to roller skate. So that's interesting parallels too, because it's like failing so publicly,
but like you can't like be getting better or like trying something new if you're not failing. And so that's another thing I can like pull to my writing, where it's like, well, I mean, just like fuck around and find out, right? Like it's back to that.
What TV shows are you watching right now?
Oh my God, I'm so terrible with TV shows because I would rather rewatch a show than like start a new one. I don't know what it is. It's like the commitment of loving something or like getting into something new. Like sometimes like does this to me, but my husband and I have been rewatching Veep just because it's hilarious. Love to laugh. It's like our love language is roasting each other. So it like keeps us sharp to like see roasting at its prime level. So been watching that, been watching Mad Men. And then I'm actually really looking forward to Mortal Kombat coming out. It's like a little touch back to childhood. It's coming out.
I'm really nervous about the new Mortal Kombat movie because I have really fond memories of like the original Mortal Kombat movie when I was a kid. It scared the shit out of me. I found it Goro. It was so scary to me though and it like was really hyped up to me because I don't know. I was a kid and I was like really scared about Mortal Kombat and Goro, but I also really loved it.
I loved it a lot. I which is why I have to watch the new one. Although I'll say that I'm nervous only because when they did the like, you know, the get over here line for it didn't seem right. And so I was like, oh no, how do you mess up just that basic line? But like, hopefully it'll be okay.
We'll check in.
We'll see.
And one of my other easier questions is that one of our other mutual interests is video games. Yeah. And how do you feel that video games tie into your writing life?
Yes, I forgot, Megan. That seems like a long time ago when I was on your island on Animal Crossing. That was so cute. Yeah, so so that's the thing that I think my writing, I've been doing that for a really long time, but my dad got me my first video game console. It was a Sega Genesis when I was 6 for my birthday. And I was playing Sonic and all of that stuff. But I think video games are really interesting because they too get a bad reputation from you know, people being like, oh, rots your brain. It's an inactive thing. But like, think about what goes into the creation that goes into a video game. Like, not just visually, but the narrative. Some video games have such good narrative. And for me, I think I'm always just chasing after narrative. And so like, you know, I like to play like stuff like The Sims and like, you know, because I can create my own narrative and my own worlds. And like, you know, I like games like Kingdom Hearts and Fallout 3 and just things where I can be in a story and like interact with the narrative 3-dimensionally. So yeah.
I think the other thing for me, like it is the narrative and it's also, again, the failure. There's something about playing a video game where the more I fail, I take that energy and I feel less self-conscious about writing because I've already just had fun failing a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be fun to not, I mean, like I'm really competitive. So like if it's failing, like it's just solo failing, that's fine. But like if me and my husband are like playing something and he's like beating me, I'm like, okay, listen, I can only do like 2 more rounds of this before we get really serious.
My God.
We're a double Leo household too. So, you know, it's all the things.
Okay. So it's always the roasting, the competition.
Oh yeah.
It's a big loud.
Yeah.
I'm a Capricorn, I'm married to a Scorpio. So there's much more harmony. And sometimes it's the water sign. If you don't make a decision right now,
yeah,
I'm going to die.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the women in this collection because I feel like I know all of them and they're all complicated and interesting. And one thing that I think is really, and I'm feeling this out because I keep going back and forth on this question, but one of the things that interests me is it feels sometimes like your storytelling also mimics the way these women, they reveal themselves, but not in the way the people around them want to. Where so much, and you mentioned like feelings are in the body, and so much of their bodies are saying everything that you need to know about them, but the people around them want them to be direct. And your stories, they take a beat before resolution that I always find really satisfying. And I know that there are some readers who they long for the resolution. They want to know, is she going to have the baby?
Yeah.
Is she going to stay with her husband? Is this mother and daughter ever going to reconcile? But there's something about you making sure that we know that it's always about them and not the outcome. And I don't know why that's tied so much to gender to me.
Mm.
And this might be saying more about me than your stories there. But I wanted to know, like, why, because it seems so important to you while writing this, why do you think the importance of the story for you lies in showing them taking control of a situation or coming to the point where they might reach at least an understanding, rather than telling us what the understanding is or showing them absolutely in control of the situation?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, is because that's actually one of the things that I love about short stories, is that it requires me to do a little bit of work. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying in a way where, because, you know, I've read stories where it seems like they literally end and I'm like, okay, wait, I don't feel like I had everything I needed yet. But I feel like for my endings in particular, I feel like I have built in all of the inference, all of the, you know, the characters are so themselves that, like, by the time you get to the ending, you can kind of see, like, okay, well, either this character is getting ready to be on the same road they've been on and it's nothing but trouble getting ready to come for them, or you can see like them having this new knowledge about themselves or the world and turning towards it. And the reason why for me it just feels like unnatural to me to like resolve things and wrap it up in a little bow, because life is not like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's always like, well, what happens next? And for me, I think of endings as windows into what's coming next rather than exits, because in my favorite stories, the stories in the character's life live off of the page. And that's kind of what I wanted to leave room for that to happen for my readers, is for these characters to keep living. Once you get to that last page, you know that that story is still going somewhere. And I feel like I feel like I have a pretty good idea about what happens after that last line. And so, yeah, I'm okay with, like, you know, y'all having to do a little bit of work on it.
Yeah, like I've read Snow 3 times now. And each time I'm like round 1, I was like, oh, she's leaving her husband. Like, this is beautiful, but she's leaving him.
Yeah.
And then the second time I was like, no, they're going to make it. This is so beautifully written, and she sees him doing like all these sweet things. Like, she can see that, like, it's the small things that matter.
She can
and
see
then
the care. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third time I was like, doesn't matter. They're not having sex. It's over.
Yeah. I kind of love that. I kind of love it, like, kind of flip-flops a little bit. You know, I think that each of these stories is gonna meet a person where they are, right? And you're gonna get a different reading. Like, you know, certain stories will speak to you because of where you are in your life, or not. And, you know, if you read it later, it might strike you differently. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You want me to tell you?
You can tell. Well, yeah, tell me. What do you think?
I see her as staying with her husband. I see her as, you know, there's this thing that she's been, what she thinks she wants, right? Which is, I feel like it's very hard for us to understand what love actually is because of all of the ways in which we've been sold about what it is in order to sell a product or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And so I think it's hard to say, it's really easy to conflate love and harm when we don't really have a great understanding of what it actually looks like. So, but I think for her, you know, when her crush is basically like, you're pretty, which is echoing the words that her husband had said to her before she left the house. I think she understood in that moment, like, oh, if I go for this thing, it's going to be just this moment, and then it's going to be done. And then what will I have? And I think, you know, her being able to see her husband in that real care, like, this is what love is. It's not just these things. It's also, I'm going to flip on the hall light for you so that when you come home, you can see your way inside. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the taking out the trash, because taking out the trash sucks.
Oh my God. Yeah. And cleaning the toilet. Like, can we, yeah, like clean a toilet for me. That's really romantic.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a house where I have to clean the toilet, he does the trash, but yeah, you split it up. You make
split it up, whatever it looks like. Yeah.
One of the other things I really like about this collection is that it's so rare in literary fiction to see even a short story where a couple actually likes each other. And a lot of your couples in these stories, they actually like each other. You can tell things are fun and sexy between them, and you're showing that like you don't need the divide to have tension, that you can still like each other and there's still room for complications and misunderstandings.
Because that's the way it is. If you literally are with another person, that's a whole person that you can be together for years and years and years and years. Like my husband and I, we've been married for, it'll be 11 years this year. And like, there's still things where I'm like, wow, I didn't know that about you. Or, oh, that surprises me about you. You know what I mean? Like, we have such depth, and there doesn't have to be just like, we're not getting along right. I mean, obviously there's couples that are kind of going through it in the collection as well, but that doesn't have to be the only narrative tension.
What advice would you give a reader who's trying to build a story around a couple who they're not going through it, but there are those like tensions of everyday life? How do you give them that narrative energy and force? Because I think so many people struggle with showing how much, I'm trying to think of a better word, or at least a less repetitive word than energy, because we both said it so much. But it is kind of like the ebbs and flows of where you have two minds and two personalities, and you do so much work that you aren't even aware of trying to live with this person and love them while still being sometimes like, if I have to, I mean, especially during pandemic, like one more hour of you and I'm gonna lock myself in the room for 2 hours to make up for it.
Yeah. I think in any situation, whatever the conflict is, whether it be, romantic partners or, familial or, whatever it is, friendships, I think it might be helpful to think about, well, as far as the tensions, is it identifying whether it's internal or if it's external? Because even external to the relationship, right? Because we live in all of these systems, right? So if you're thinking about white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, we're living in all of these systems, and that has a pressure. And then like, how does that filter down into the relationship? Or like, how are these people who are in conflict or in tension with each other, whether that's, something outside of their relationship or not, like where is it coming from? So that's a good start. I mean, that's probably like, that's a good start. I don't know what else to say.
I think that's a great start. It's the question.
Yeah.
Find the right question.
Yeah, I think questions. I think that too, when I'm trying to build a story, I operate more in the mode of questions than answers, because answers are so rare. Like real, true answers. Even an answer that you think is an answer could be temporary. Do you know what I mean? So like questions that'll lead you to deeper questions, which somehow get at the truth.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where you're like 23 and you're like, of course there are answers. And then I hit my 30s and I was like, no, every answer is temporary. And the more complicated you make your life, you find out that even the answers become questions.
Even the answers become questions, exactly. Or every answer that you get has the, dot. It's like, for now. Which is, that's the only constant in our whole universe, is that things change. Everything else is fluid.
We're here and we change and we change and we change.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a personal question. Okay. When did you realize that you were a writer, that you knew that you were serious about it? And I'm not asking like the childhood, I filled a bunch of notebooks or a teacher praised you, but when as an adult did you realize?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I do have the childhood thing because I think that that's just the way my brain works. I oftentimes don't understand what I think or feel until I've had a chance to write it down and then organize it, and then I can figure it out. But basically, I'm in the process still of writing this novel, but I had written a novel when I was like 12, whatever. It was terrible, blah, blah, blah. And then in like 2010, when I was, going into undergraduate, or when I was going into the second half of my undergraduate. So I went to a community college at first, and then I transferred to a state college. But I found it, and it was awful, but I was like, oh, the ideas aren't bad. And so sometime between 2010 and 2015, I was trying to write it, and I would get to like 10,000 words and stop, and 15 and stop, like for a year between some of those times. And then I realized in 2015, I had to like sit down and be honest with myself, which was, do you really want to do this? Like, you've been doing it like on and off your whole life, and it's, something that you're drawn to clearly, because if I had wanted to not write that book, it would have been so easy to not write it, because I was already not writing it. Like, writing a book is really hard, and it's easier to just be like, no, I'm not going to write it. And that's the easier thing. And so when I kept coming back to it, I had to have that conversation with myself, and I was like, I think I need more support. And that's when I started, looking up MFAs, and, I had to have the talk with my husband, because even a fully funded MFA can be a sacrifice. It was for us. You still have to move to the place, which costs money. And then, you don't get your first paycheck until whenever. And so my husband had to like move back in with his mom so that he could help me, pay the rent and all that stuff. And after all of that, I didn't know if it was going to be worth it. Like, you can't be like, I'm a writer, I'm going to make a bunch of money and people are going to read my book. That's not like a thing. So I was like, hey, I don't know if this was going to be worth it, but I feel like I have to try to do this. Like, I feel like I have to do it. And so I did it, and I finished a book, and someone bought it and said, that's good. But yeah, so I think it was around 2015. I was turning 26.
So it's 8:45.
Yeah.
I'm going to check the chat and see if anybody has questions.
Yeah. We're really friendly. You can ask us any and all of the questions. I mean, not any of the questions.
But
not any of the questions, but you can ask us some questions.
Yeah. You have a great is even too much pressure, but you have a question. Now's the time. We're here. We're chill. Although I said that in like the most unchill way.
We're chill.
I'm chill.
I liked it. I was into it.
I've got weird energy today. It has been
a day. Every single day I have woken up in a panic, like an hour or so before my alarm has gone off, thinking that I have overslept an event. And there's been like this panic, but like a dread for grabbing my phone to check what time it is. I'm like, oh no, I've missed an event. And it's not been the case, but I've not been able to go back to sleep because adrenaline. So it's just up early for no reason.
How are you also adjusting? Like, you were in Florida and then you moved to Wisconsin. How are you adjusting to being back in Wisconsin?
I'm still in Florida for now. I'm teaching.
Oh,
yeah. We're teaching remote, but so I'm teaching at the same place where I did my MFA. In the spring and the summer, it's pretty normal. It's pretty like now nobody has humidity like over here. Like, when people be like, oh, it's hot. Like, I remember going to like California for the first time, and somebody's like, yeah, it's really hot. It's gonna be hot today. And it was supposed to be like 90 degrees or something. So I was like, oh, okay. And I walked out, and because there's no like humidity, it was like, this is hot for you? I was like, this is fine. This is great. So like, spring and summer was like that, except no humidity. It was like beautiful. And then winter happened, and it was really cute, but it was very less cute in May, when it was supposed to be spring. And I was like, it's knowing what is going on. But like, honestly, if you have the right clothes and the right boots, it's fine.
Do you think you'll ever write a Wisconsin collection? You're going to have lived in Wisconsin long enough, do you think?
Probably eventually. But I feel like, so it's one of the things that, Danielle Evans, I heard her say. She was like, she left, and she teaches at Johns Hopkins, and she was like, well, maybe after a couple of years I'll have enough distance from Madison to write about Madison, you know what I mean, or like write content and all that. So yeah, but I think it's a really cool, Madison's a cute city anyway, I think.
I've never been to Madison. I'm from Michigan, and right now I can't imagine writing anything that's not set in Michigan, even though I've lived in Indiana for like 5 years now. And
yeah,
And I know that people outside the Midwest don't feel that way, but they are so very different places that, to me, I can't really imagine writing about Indiana because I don't understand Indiana at all.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Understanding is very important in being able to write something like so situated in a place. Like, so my novel obviously too is half in Florida, but then the other half of it is I live very briefly in Washington State.
Okay.
Yeah, there was one point in my life where I was fed up with all of my relationships, like all of the people in my life, and I was like, I am leaving here. I am going the furthest I could possibly go and still be in the contiguous United States. And I went, and I did it for like 3 months, and it's really expensive to live over there.
Yeah.
As compared to Florida, even in like 2009 when I did that, and I was just like, yeah, cereal is expensive. I couldn't bartend over there either. Like in Florida, you only have to be 18 to bartend. So I was bartending. People would be so mad. I'd be like, hey, can I check your ID? And they'd be like, are you even old enough to drink? I was like, no, but I'm old enough to not serve you. So I need you to let me check your ID. But I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
You have to be 21 to serve over there. So like, I was just so broke. I had to come home.
Well, let me ask you one more question because everybody else is being a little quiet. But the other thing I really liked about this collection is that people are the waiters, they're bartenders. And how much do you think, like, working as a bartender yourself, how do you think that influenced your take on writing fiction too? Like, how does that?
A lot. Number one, like, there's a weird thing, like even your regulars who like come to, care about you in whatever ways that, they're transactional relationships, but still there's like a way in which people don't view you as a real person. So they'll just tell you anything. And so like, that was like the best place that I could be to work as far as like getting stories from people, because people just tell you anything and you're just like, it's just like a really up close personal way to understand like ways in which people work, how people move through their lives. Really interesting. I had to stop doing it eventually because my filter, like I have, there's the filter that you do when you're in public, especially if you're serving tables as your, way of making money. And I still have the filter by the end of it, but more and more like my real thought that I wanted to say would get to the filter and I'd be like, fuck it, I'm going to say it anyway, because like you are not going to be, no. Yeah, but yeah, so I had to leave it eventually. But yeah, I think that people tend to look at those jobs like working class jobs, right? And it's like, even how we say that, like low wage jobs, and there's a judgment on that, right? Judging people and how whatever they're doing to like survive and live their lives at that time. But yeah, I think it's a great way to get all of these issues about race and class and all of that stuff in just this one space, like surrounded by everybody's needs and desires and all of that stuff. So yeah, I'm probably going to keep writing about like that industry for a while.
It's really hard to find the right spaces in fiction though, where you find the intersection of both like the big issues like race, class, systemic oppression. If you're interested, I don't know why I'm being so casual, like if you're interested, but it is still true. Like you have to find the space where you don't always have to make it explicit. Like there are some stories where the explicitness is important, but most of the time you're trying to find a space where you can put your character into that tension and explore it without finding like the rant or screed that other spaces can force you into.
Yeah, I think 100%. I think that, the biggest thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to depict a person, a life, you know what I mean? A whole like slice of a world that you're going to get to see. And so like the biggest thing that I can do is have no judgment. Like the characters are going to judge themselves and each other. The reader is going to do that. But my job as the author is to not do that and just like let it happen on the page. And like that's a way too of not being didactic, is like to let the situations unfurl organically from the settings and from whatever it is that you've built. So you know what I mean? I'm not trying to lead readers to any sort of moral decision by the end of each story or by the end of the book, but it's like you're going to be in it. You're going to be steeped into whatever this character is steeped in. And so hopefully a reader will pause after reading something and just have a moment to think about how those things correlate in their own lives. But yeah.
Daniel, do you want to come back?
Yeah.
Come join us.
I can't figure out how to turn my video on. We have links to purchase both your books in chat. You know, if you click on them now, they will still be there when the video ends.
We got
So-
a question. we got a question now. When Daniel comes back. Daniel, you were the missing element. We
Yeah.
need you.
Well, let's.
You were the spark.
Yeah.
Oh well. Do I get to ask it then?
Yeah, you
I'm
asked
trying.
Yeah, you asked.
ask it.
Do you ever work on multiple stories at once, or find boundaries blending between narratives?
And I would be interested to have Megan answer this question too.
Yes, excellent for
Yes,
both of you.
and that would be a good way to like end it, as we both answer our one question that we got. Thank you, Trevor. So I'm weird. I like to like only work on one story if I can, like, and finish it, but like sometimes that's just not possible. So if I'm stuck, I'll pop over to another story or pop over to the novel, and so that way I don't like stay roadblocked too long in any one space. And then sometimes if I'm, you know, I take my attention away from the story that I'm stuck on and I'm doing other stuff, it works itself out. It's working itself out in my brain, and I'll be like, oh, okay, actually I got it. And then I can do it. But the biggest thing I can do for myself in a draft is to remember that I enjoy writing. I enjoy doing it. Everything else that I feel pressure about, or I feel anxiety about, or I'm like, oh, that's all external. That's something external that I've internalized. I like it. I like to do it. And so like, let myself play, let myself fail. It's only a draft, and then I can build the next step.
So back when I had time to write short stories, I was writing multiple stories at once. And sometimes what I found a lot of is that I did struggle, like in the question, it mentions, how do you find like the boundaries of blending between narratives? And I would struggle sometimes because a section of one story would become the section of the next, become a section of the next. And it made my revision process so much harder because I had to sit down and start writing questions at the top of each page. Like, what am I trying to actually understand here? And then separate them back out from each other. Right now, I'm only writing my second novel because I'm on a deadline, and
Yes.
I have to have laser focus. And it's also this new novel. I've been really enjoying it. It's like a vacation because it's about witches and being in this different world completely. So it's also been really easy to be immersed in this one space because it's not here. All of my anxieties about living go away right now because I'm so immersed in this other place.
No.
Okay, well, now I'm really excited to read that.
Yeah, I'm excited for you.
I'm excited for you to read it too, Daniel.
Dantiel, are you working on? Can you talk a little about what you're working on?
I am working on a novel.
Yeah.
I've been working on it for a very long time, and I hope to get a full second draft by sometime this year, and that's where I'm at on it. I'm very like superstitious about like, I haven't made it work for myself yet, so I don't want to like bleed out whatever.
Completely understood.
Is. Yeah. But I am working on something. Hopefully, pray for me. Yeah, send me your juju. Need it.
Okay, one last question for both of you.
Okay.
Since this all started by Megan recommending your book, I was wondering if you wanted to recommend somebody else to us.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so many good things. Number
Or you
one,
can do more than one if you want.
yeah. So, so there's The Wild Fox of Yemen is coming out. It's a poetry collection by Threya Alamonster. That's going to be great. That's out with, I think I might be lying. It might not be Grey Wolf, but it's coming out. You should check it out. And then there is Field Study by Shayla Seabree. It's kind of like this hybrid prose poetry essay kind of thing that's kind of exploring the resistance of and the desire for whiteness in this really interesting way. And then my next book
It's taped.
is going to be the final revival of Opal and Neb by Donnie Walton. This comes out at the end of this month. You should check it out. It's got like black rock stars and like, you know, Confederate flags and all of the stuff, all of the things that make tight, tense stories. So check that out. What about you?
Great. I'm really looking forward to Brenda Tainato's book. I think it's coming out in
Rock
June.
Eaters.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I
It's another
want
short
to do an
story.
event with her. She's from Florida. She's doing like Florida stuff too in the book.
Yeah, she is. Are you doing an event with her?
We're trying to work something out for like in the future. Yeah, she's gotta have the baby first.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
tell me, because I want to hear the two of you talk to each other. Her collection is so good.
Yeah.
I was really uncomfortable in a good way. LaTanya McQueen's When the Reckoning Comes, it comes out in August, and it's horror, and it's so just discomforting at times that I had a really hard time reading it, but I also really enjoyed it. And those are just two of them. I have like a million more, but it's been a day.
PBR.
You have to save some for your other, for when people ask you.
Exactly.
A stockpile.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for both of you. What a wonderful evening. Continued success to both of you.
Thank you.
Everything is coming up, both of you. So
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for
And
hosting us.
also, you do so much for people's books. Daniel, you're incredible. Thank you so
stop.
much. No, you sold more than 200 copies of my book. I'm going to tell you that you're incredible every time I see you.
All right. Well,
Thanks for coming, everybody.
thank you. Right. We
Thanks,
wouldn't have a
everybody, for
bookstore without
coming.
you. Right. They're the real stars. They are the real stars. So thank you all. Wouldn't have a bookstore, wouldn't have authors writing wonderful collections and novels. So hope to see you at another event. And we're all going to find out when you're speaking to the other authors. So, because I think we all want to sign up for that. So cool. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.